name is Rachita. I make a webcomic called Sanitary Panels. Sanitary Panels is a feminist webcomic that comments on society, culture, and politics. I started my comic in 2014 in response to students being arrested for posting their political opinions against the ruling party. I want everyone to close your eyes or do whatever you do when you imagine something. Now, imagine three panels. In the first panel, someone says, Modi sucks. In the second panel, nothing happens. And in the third panel, this person lands up in jail. So that was the first comic I was going to show you, but MBIFL editors asked me to remove it. So it has now been removed. Um, but that was the first comic that I ever made. And the reason I wanted to show it to you was to say that anyone can make comics, anyone can draw. I used to make my comics on paper with a pen, take a picture, and upload it on social media. But I just wanted to say anyone can draw, and everyone should draw. Um, since 2014, though, my comic has evolved immensely. But I'll quickly take you through some of my comics right from the beginning. So can we have the next slide? Yeah, so this is, again, a comic I made on my notebook. Silly doesn't mean, and like, it just came to me and I drew it and I posted it on social media, and that was that. Um, yeah, so this one, I'm surprised this one made the cut. But I was speaking basically about Amir Khan saying that India is not a tolerant country, and then people came back to him sending him death threats, asking him to admit that India is a tolerant country. So the irony was lost on them. I started mostly to entertain my family and friends, and some comics really did take off though, like the Tolerant one. Then I made this one about queer rights. I made this one about men's rights activists. Sorry. So after a couple of years of doing this, I was gifted a Wacom tablet, and it helped me. It helped me start drawing digitally. So now most of my comics I do are digital. I'm not a big fan of the Wacom tablet, mostly because I'm not an artist and I don't know how to use it. But it encouraged me to learn software, which was good. So then I started making weekly comics for Forbes India, and yeah, this is an example from that. As you can see, like my lines are straighter on the edges, which I really don't like. I like the feeling of it being hand-drawn, and this is all on the tablet. Could I have the next slide? This as well. So one of my earlier comics that faced censorship was a comic that I made in 2018. I made a comic about Facebook's community standards being unfair and disproportionately disadvantageous to women. And so I made this comic so I just wanted to put a content warning. I made this comic criticizing Facebook's community standards. Could I have the next slide? And I had like experienced this with the community standards many times, so I decided finally to make a comic about it. And guess what? It violated the community standards. So Facebook took this comic down, did not give me any notice about it, took it down and said it violated community standards, but didn't tell me which community standards it violated. So what I did is I went on Twitter, I asked my followers to post the comic and tag Facebook and Instagram and basically ask them why they took this comic down. And it picked up some media attention as well. Scroll, and can I get the next slide, please? Oh yeah, this is one of the, anyway. So yeah, it says it doesn't follow our community guidelines, and they didn't say which one it was. Next slide, please. So it got some media attention, and then magically, it did not violate the community standards anymore, and Facebook and Instagram both put it up. So that was some of my earlier work. I now draw, blah, blah. I now draw with an iPad and an Apple Pencil. This is not an ad for Apple, but it's helped me immensely to make my comics with this tool. And now I can show you some of my more recent work. This I made on my phone with an Android stylus. This I made on my iPad. Could I get the next one? You can see it's like clearer and much more legible, and it works better, I hope, for my audience. This is a play on puja. What is this behavior? If people didn't get the reference. Could I get the next one? So what I try to do with my comic is that when there is an issue that campaigners are working on, activists are working on, I try and mobilize around it and push people to either understand what's happening or to sign a petition or to show up at a protest. So I did this for when trans activists were against the trans rights bill because it was very regressive. And so I asked folks to sign a petition to end, to stop this bill from going through. I also try to do things on, public consultation. So if there's a public consultation, for example, there was I don't think I have it right here, but the environment impact assessment was being edited, and I saw that there's a public consultation for it, and campaigners were trying to get responses to it. So I made comics about it and asked people to go and respond to the public consultation and say that they don't want these amendments to be made in the EIA. So basically, I want sanitary panels to be a tool that or a resource that activists on the front lines can use. So also to that end, during the CANRC protests, this is another example of campaigning and mobilization. I made a lot of comics on Aadhaar because I worked very closely on the privacy implications of the Aadhaar and how exclusionary the system is. Could I have the next one? Yeah, so I didn't remember that this made the cut. But this was also, this says, Marne se pehle vote zarur dena, which means please do vote for me before you die. And this is when Modi was hosting public rallies ahead of the West Bengal elections. So he was defying all COVID protocols while the second wave was in full force in India, and he was going around and boasting about the audience. Another comic that was supposed to be here again, which was deleted before I could present it, was Modi standing in front of a crematorium and saying, "I have never seen such big crowds gathered like this." And that was again ahead of the West Bengal elections, again when hundreds of thousands of people were dying because of COVID. And here we have our Prime Minister boasting about the fact that his rallies are very, very populous and are not following COVID protocols. A couple of my CANRC protest comics have also been removed, but I'll just briefly speak about that. So during the CANRC protests, I was very active. So when the news broke, it was followed by protests, and I, sitting in my room, thought, what is the best way that I can support these protesters? So I was like, what do people want? What are they looking for? So the first one is know where the protests are happening. So I shared a lot of stories, giving locations and details about where the closest protest to them was. The second one was that the protesters need artwork to carry to the protests. So I made artwork that was easily replicable. And again, I think all of those slides have been removed, but there were many people who copied my comics onto a chart paper or a cardboard themselves and took it to the protests, which was exactly what I wanted to do, be of use while there are people putting their lives on the line for our country. So yeah, I spoke about the mishandling of the COVID pandemic. And then could you go back one? In 2020, a law student had filed a criminal contempt of court case against me, which the Attorney General gave consent to go forward. And so there is a contempt of court case ongoing against 3 of my comics right now. I cannot speak about these 3 comics because the case is ongoing. The next date, in fact, is on the 10th of this month in the Supreme Court. And that brings us to now. Could I have the next slide, please? Apart from making comics for my own page, I also make weekly comics for the News Minute. Shout out to the News Minute. And I take up short-term projects with nonprofits and media houses, but This is an example of something I did recently for the News Minute. Can I have the next slide? This is from personal experience. I can draw Modi in 5 seconds now, and I'm not happy about that. That's supposed to be Zubair. This is when he was arrested. Thank you. I think my Instagram ID got cut there a bit, but if you scan this QR code, you can reach my Instagram page. You can give me a follow or an insult. I'm used to both. I'll open it up to questions. I have also rushed through this a bit because I did not have the time that was allocated to me because the edits were being made right before this presentation. And ironically, tomorrow I have a session at 5 o'clock where I will be speaking about this kind of censorship. Thank you.
You may now ask questions to Rachita, if you have any.
Interesting. How do you handle all these legal notices and the pressure?
So I have been very privileged and fortunate to be, because of the campaigning work that I did in the past, with Greenpeace, Mozilla Foundation, a bunch of other organizations. I've had the privilege to be in touch with some of the best lawyers in the country. So that really takes the edge off, to know that there are people dedicated to working pro bono for you, for no money, spending their time because they believe in your work. So just a shout out to my legal team, shout out to also the artist community that really stepped up and publicly condemned what happened, the contempt charges. They publicly condemned it and made many, many artworks. I think like 30 or 40 artists made their own versions of my comic in order to show support, and they also wrote op-eds about it and things. So I feel very privileged to have access to a good legal team, to also have the kind of caste and language. I want to take a moment to appreciate, to acknowledge the fact that I have caste privilege. I was raised Hindu. I have that privilege going for me. If I were another religion, if I were a minority religion, I don't know what would have happened. So yeah, it is stressful, but like Apupen said, there is hope and strength in community.